Hello everybody. I thought I would do a catch up on what I've been doing with the Great Granny Squared. This is a quilt along by Lori Holt of Bee in My Bonnet, as well as the Fat Quarter Shop. This is part of their It's So Emma pattern series. Fat Quarter Shop is a great place to buy all things for Lori Holt, as well as quilting, crocheting even, as well as cross stitch. And so the Great Granny Squared is this particular pattern. You can see that there is the mama, or the baby, the mama, the grandma, and the great grandmother in a granny square pattern. The quilt along is regarding this particular quilt, and I did not buy Lori Holt's fantastically beautiful fabric for this. I am busting my stash. I also started busting my yarn stash and realized I didn't have enough yarn for the crochet part, but it is in fact a quilt along and stitch along, both cross stitch and crochet. And I decided to do all three. Yes, I am an overachiever. It must have been the boredom from when I was recuperating from having COVID in May. And then I was a double winner. I got it again mid-July. And now we're rolling into August, and I am a wee bit behind on the quilt along. But this is a beautiful quilt of 20 blocks. So look what I did. So the little story behind these squares is I decided to go with these bright color granny square with pearl cotton because I started out first with making the granny square cross stitch. I bought a 14 count Ada, and I bought pearl cotton instead of floss. With COVID brain, sometimes you really don't think straight. So I bought a bag of this beautifully colored pearl cotton, and I decided to go over two, you can see my boo-boos here. Let's look at the correct one, over two sets of threads. And yes, I made a mistake. And so I decided, who cares? Let's go ahead and make this into a bookmark. It is the cross stitch is a craft I said I would never do after a 20-year project of a Santa Claus with very difficult stitching. This is easy stitching. It's got beautiful color. It's also not so complicated that you can't do it. I looked up on several YouTube videos on how to finish it. And so what they did is they fused this to a heavy duty felt. So I fused the two layers together with a fusible interfacing, and then I stitched super close in the middle here as well as along the edge. You can see my stitching. And that finished it. But since I was concerned that this would fray, the Ada cloth, I ran a bead of Eileen's fabric glue along the edge. And I'm using this in my journal as a bookmark. It's a little oversized, but it's perfect for what I'm doing. And since I had a whole bunch of pearl cotton left, a whole bag, of course, I didn't buy just one. I bought like this whole collection. I thought, why don't I make a doll's crocheted granny square, which is part of Lori Holt's crochet along. 16 is about all I'm going to get out of the pearl cotton, and then I'm going to sew them or crochet them together and maybe use all the leftovers to crochet a border around. I have a teddy bear that I have been dressing, and this would be a beautiful little crocheted blanket for my bear. Let me show you where I'm at with the quilt blocks. So I thought I'd show you. This starts with 2.5-inch squares, and you assemble them in rows. This needs to be pressed. And you follow the pattern that you purchased from Fat Quarter Shop. This is a beautiful pattern written by Lori Holt. In addition to this pattern, there are several others in the book. I would recommend it. I thought it was worth the money that they wanted for it. And let me show you where I'm at. It's a 20 block quilt. I have 9 that I'm going to show you, a 10th one almost finished, 11th one cut out. So I feel like I'm over halfway with the piecing. Got a little bit behind, but I usually do on quilt-alongs. And you know what? It doesn't matter if I go over the deadline. It's just a great thing to sew along with other people and show your progress as you go. And you can certainly do that. I will link Fat Quarter Shop's all of the information on their kickoff to the Great Granny Squared Quilt Along. Again, here's the baby, the mama, the grandma, and the great grandma. I love this particular quilt. I do black. I like pinks, teals, and blues. But I thought I would go with this wonderful, lovely, summery palette. I went on Pinterest because I really was struggling with foggy brain and trying to pick colors. And I picked a color palette that I really, really liked. And the pin was entitled Mexican Embroidery. And I just, this color, you know, as a quilter, you're always going to be picking threads off, right? And look, here's a seam that I ripped and didn't get all the threads out. Got to show that on camera. So, pinks, middle blues, teals, yellows, and oranges make up this particular color palette. And I think it goes well with the colors that I picked for that pearl cotton. This one is a little bit darker. And I'm busting stash with this. I like the middle, I think, being a darker color. I have a few of them where I picked a lighter color in the middle. And this one just reminds me of the color of the Great Lakes here in Michigan in the summer, as well as the ocean. Just love it. This particular quilt block, I'm not a huge fan of how this fabric cut up into smaller pieces. I'm not going to use more of this fabric in this particular quilt, but you know, the more fabrics you add, the more interesting the quilt will become, even though individually you'll look and go, wow, these dots may not be particularly fantastic on their own, but with all of these other bright colors, it makes for a great presentation on the design wall. I like this one, even though the center is not a dark color. It's bright, and I tried to offset it with this electric blue. This is a black that I did recently, and I do love this lime green in there. And it has such a fun, summery feel. Here's one where I chose a lighter color in the center, and that's after I made this particular block. I don't know that I will do many more with the light center. I think having that dark center really makes a difference in drawing your eye in, especially if you have a wild color in the final row. Like this one, the hot pink kind of dominates, but the bold color in the middle really helps keep your eye jumping around. And this one shows, you know, the darker color in the center. That's a medium color, I suppose. But I just didn't like that pale color. So anyway, that is where I'm at with the Great Granny Squared Quilt Along. And I just love how all of these bright colors are coming together. And, you know, when you follow somebody's pattern, it's a great way to keep your mind exercised. I don't have to think too much about construction of these blocks. It was all well spelled out in the pattern, as well as the free. This pattern is free on Fat Quarter Shop. And Lori Holt has a free tutorial on how to crochet granny squares. She used her chunky thread, which makes a 4-inch granny. Oh my gosh, they're super cute. I'm on the waiting list at Fat Quarter Shop to get some of Lori's thread and make myself a coat of many colors, a cardigan in the fall. So that's what I've been up to. I'm doing well, slow recuperation, probably long COVID, but you know, it's only been a few months. So we're going to keep positive thoughts going, work on my strength and smell training, and hopefully before long I'll be back to being face on camera, but not anytime soon. Everybody have a most wonderful week, and next week we'll talk about the stitch along that kicks off with both Lori Holt and Fat Quarter Shop on a cross stitch pattern that does have a little bit of a quilt theme, because you know I love doing all kinds of crafts for creative bursts and inspiration, but I like quilting, I think, the most. Anyway, everyone have a most wonderful week of creativity, and hopefully we'll see you next week.